diving into the world of off-grid living.
Okay, so we're using the Off-Grid Living Handbook, How to Live Off the Grid,
Yeah.
the ultimate beginner's guide for this deep dive.
Yeah, it's a great resource.
And even if you're listening and you're thinking, I'm never going to live in a cabin in the woods or something, this should still be pretty interesting for you.
I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
There's a lot to learn here about self-sufficiency and sustainability.
Right, just being more, aware of where things come from and how to do things for yourself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
first of all, what does it really mean to live off the grid?
Well, the most basic definition is disconnecting from public utilities.
Okay.
So that means things like electricity, water, and sewage systems.
So you're not getting a bill every month for those things.
Exactly. You're creating your own independent systems.
Wow. So it's kind of like,
Yeah, it's like building a miniature civilization.
yeah, it's like your own little world, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that the handbook really emphasizes, is that it's not just about escaping. It's about creating something new,
Right.
something more self-reliant.
And it all starts with energy, right? I mean, you got to have power.
Absolutely.
So the book talks about a lot of different ways to generate your own electricity off grid, like solar panels,
Solar's very popular.
right? And wind turbines.
Yeah.
And even this thing called microhydro, which is basically like using water to generate power. That one sounds pretty cool.
It is, yeah. It's like a little mini dam, you know,
Yeah.
harnessing the power of water.
Right. But the book also mentions that, sometimes the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow.
Yeah, that's the thing with renewable energy sources. They can be intermittent.
Right.
So it's really important to have a backup plan. And they really emphasize the importance of a reliable generator.
Okay.
And they even have like a specific one that they recommend called the ultimate off-grid generator.
The ultimate off-grid generator, is that like the brand name or is that just what they...
Well, it's kind of like their, top pick
Right.
based on all their research.
Okay.
It's got high efficiency. It can run on multiple fuel types.
Okay. So it's very versatile.
Yeah, so you're not stuck if you can't get one type of fuel.
Right.
You've got options.
So it's kind of like having an insurance policy for your energy needs.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, you've got your main source of power, but then you've got this backup that can kick in if you need it.
Right. And that's something that even if you're not living off grid, it's a good idea to have some kind of backup power source in case of emergencies.
Absolutely.
Like a storm or a power outage or something.
Yeah, think about those situations. Being prepared can make all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got power. Now we need water, right?
Water, yes, that's another crucial element.
Another essential.
Absolutely.
And the book talks about a lot of different ways to get water off grid.
It does.
Which is cool, like rainwater harvesting,
Water harvesting is a good one, yeah.
digging wells, even purifying water through this process called reverse osmosis.
Reverse osmosis, yeah.
That sounds kind of sci-fi to me.
Yeah.
I don't really understand how it works, but...
Well, it basically uses pressure to remove impurities from water.
Oh, okay. So it's like filtering it, but with pressure.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty amazing technology.
Oh, yeah.
And it really highlights the resourcefulness of off-grid living,
Right. Like thinking outside the box, finding new ways to do things.
Yeah, and using technology in creative ways.
Yeah. And they even talk about composting toilets.
Composting toilets, yeah.
Which is something I've heard about, but I don't really know much about.
Yeah, well, they're a great example of a closed-loop system.
Okay.
So, instead of flushing waste away, you're actually composting it,
You're right.
which turns it into fertilizer.
So you're not wasting anything.
Exactly.
And you're creating something useful.
Yeah, it's all about sustainability.
So what about food? I mean, you can't just order takeout when you're living off the grid.
No, you got to be a bit more self-sufficient when it comes to food.
Right.
And the handbook talks about the importance of strategic planning,
Okay.
thinking ahead about what you're going to grow, how you're going to store it.
So it's like you're a farmer now.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, you've got to be connected to the land and the seasons.
Right.
And they mention a bunch of different approaches, like permaculture gardening.
Permaculture, what is that?
Well, it's a type of gardening that focuses on creating sustainable ecosystems.
Oh.
So you're not just planting crops, you're creating a whole system that works together,
Right.
like mimicking natural patterns.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And they also talk about greenhouses.
Greenhouses, yeah. Those are great for extending the growing season.
Right. You can grow things year-round.
Exactly.
And then there's this thing called aquaponics, which I've always been fascinated by.
Aquaponics, yeah, that's a cool one.
It's like fish and plants working together, right?
Yeah, it's a symbiotic relationship.
Right.
The fish waste provides nutrients for the plants,
Oh, wow.
and the plants help purify the water for the fish.
So it's like a little ecosystem.
Yeah, it's a self-sustaining system.
That's so cool.
It is, yeah. It's a great example of how off-grid living can be really innovative,
Right.
pushing the boundaries of traditional farming.
Yeah. And they also talk about preserving food.
Food preservation. Yeah, that's essential.
Right, because you can't just have fresh food all the time.
Right. You got to think about how you're going to store your harvest.
Right.
And they talk about all the traditional methods like canning and dehydrating.
Oh, yeah. My grandma used to can everything.
Yeah, those are time-tested techniques.
Right.
Passed down through generations.
Yeah. And it's kind of cool to think about, like, learning those skills.
Yeah, completely.
Even if you're not living off the grid, it's like a connection to the past.
Yeah, and it's a way to be more self-sufficient.
Right. Like, I can imagine having a pantry full of jars of stuff that I canned myself.
Yeah, that's a great feeling.
Yeah.
Knowing that you've got food put away for the winter or whatever.
Yeah.
It's empowering.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got power, we've got water, we've got food.
What's next?
We need a place to live, right?
Shelter. Yeah, we can't forget about that.
Right. So the book talks about what makes a good off-grid home.
It does.
And it's not just about building a cabin in the woods.
No, there's more to it than that.
Right. It needs to be energy efficient.
Energy efficiency is key.
Right.
You want to minimize your energy needs.
Right. And using sustainable materials.
Sustainable materials, yeah, that's important too.
Like what kind of materials?
Well, things like wood that's been sustainably harvested.
Okay.
Maybe recycled materials, things
yeah.
that are good for the environment.
So it's about being thoughtful about the design and the materials.
Yeah, it's about building a home that works in harmony with its surroundings.
Right.
Not just imposing your will on the landscape.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So now this all sounds pretty great, but I imagine there are some challenges to living off-grid.
There are definitely challenges.
Right.
Mm.
I mean, I'm just thinking about the cost, all this stuff. Solar panels, generators, water systems.
The upfront cost can be significant, yeah.
Right. And then there's the learning curve.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to learn how to do all this stuff.
Absolutely, there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, it's not like you just flip a switch and suddenly you're off the grid.
No. It takes time and effort and dedication.
And what about like regulations and permits and stuff?
Yeah, that can be a hurdle too.
Right, because I imagine it varies from place to place.
It does, yeah. Some areas are more off-grid friendly than others,
Right.
so you definitely want to do your research before you just go and set up shop somewhere.
Right, and beyond the practical stuff, I imagine there's also like a mental or emotional aspect to it.
Absolutely.
Like you have to be okay with being more isolated.
Yeah, that's a big one for some people.
Right, and being more self-reliant.
Yeah, you got to be comfortable problem solving. Because things are going to come up. Things are going to break.
Right, you can't just call a plumber or an electrician.
Exactly. You got to figure it out yourself.
Yeah, so it sounds like you need a lot of patience and adaptability.
Those are essential qualities for off-grid living.
Right, because things aren't always going to go according to plan.
Exactly. You got to be able to roll with the punches.
Yeah. But I guess those are good skills to have in any situation.
They are. Yeah, they're life skills.
Right.
Being able to problem solve, being resilient, being adaptable.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Those will serve you well no matter where you live.
Okay, so we've talked about the challenges, but what about the financial side of things?
Well, that's an interesting aspect.
Right, because I imagine it's expensive to set all this up.
It can be. Yeah, the initial investment can be substantial.
Right.
But the long-term financial benefits can be pretty significant too.
Oh, really? Like how?
Well, for one thing, you're not paying utility bills.
Right.
So you're saving money on electricity, water, sewage.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And in some areas, there are tax incentives for using renewable energy.
Oh, wow.
So you might actually get money back from the government.
That's pretty cool.
It is, yeah. And then there's the possibility of generating income.
Oh, really? Huh.
Well, if you're generating your own electricity, you might be able to sell excess energy back to the grid.
Wow, so your house becomes like a little power plant.
Yeah, it's like a mini power plant.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So you're actually making money.
Yeah, you could potentially offset some of your costs or even generate a profit.
Wow, that's incredible.
It is, yeah. It's one of the things that makes off-grid living so appealing to some people.
Right. Like you're not just saving money, you're actually making money.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful incentive.
It is, yeah. It's a way to become more financially independent.
Right. And it all ties into this idea of sustainability and self-sufficiency,
Absolutely.
which seems to be really resonating with people these days.
Yeah, I think there's a growing awareness of the impact we have on the planet.
Right.
And people are looking for ways to reduce their footprint.
Right. Like being more mindful of their consumption
Exactly.
and taking responsibility for their own needs.
Yeah, it's about being more intentional about how we live.
Yeah. So it seems like off-grid living is more than just a lifestyle choice.
I think it's a philosophy.
Right. It's a statement about values.
Yeah, it's about independence, it's about sustainability, it's about connection to nature.
Yeah. And even if you're not ready to go completely off the grid,
Right.
I think there's a lot we can learn from this way of life,
Absolutely.
like the importance of self-sufficiency and resilience.
Yeah, those are valuable qualities no matter where you live.
Right. And being more mindful of our consumption.
Yeah, being aware of our impact on the planet
Right.
and finding ways to reduce our footprint.
Yeah. And maybe even trying some of these things ourselves.
Yeah, like growing some of our own food
Right.
or exploring renewable energy options
Yeah.
or just being more resourceful in general.
Right.
I think it's all about taking small steps.
Yeah. One step at a time.
Yeah, and seeing where it leads you.
Yeah. Because maybe off-grid living isn't for everyone.
It's not for everyone,
Right.
but I think there's something in it for all of us
Yeah, I think so too.
if we're willing to open our minds to it.
All right. Well, that was a fascinating deep dive into off-grid living.
It was.
I learned a lot.
Me too.
And I hope our listeners did too.
I hope so.
And maybe some of them will even be inspired to try some of this stuff themselves.
That would be great.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's just a small step in the direction of self-sufficiency and sustainability.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.